Hey everybody. Technical challenges as always. I'm going to talk about NFTs and generative art. Ready to go? All right. I brought some interactivity, so hopefully we can have a little bit of fun. So this will be sort of high level, hopefully accessible to everybody. And as I'm rambling along, I'd love to get questions as I'm going. So I'll just kind of dive right in with a little bit of my background. So I'm not a professor. I actually work at Apple. They, not unsurprisingly, like to keep some distance between themselves and the blockchain. So they said, please don't use our logo and let everyone know that you're here on your own and you're absolutely not representing Apple. And I'm here on my own. I'm not representing Apple, but that's where I work. Way back in 2001, I got a PhD in physics from CU over in the basement, deep in the basement of Gilla, surrounded by PhD students and no windows. And even if you did have a window, I did laser stuff, so you had to put tinfoil over your window and tape it. So there you go. And then pretty quickly afterwards, I kind of realized that maybe I'd like to do some other stuff, and especially programming. And so I pretty quickly kind of took a big step away from that many-year adventure and was a programmer for a lot of years, doing lots of different stuff, web and backend and front end, and just a mobile and a lengthy adventure. And then maybe about 10 years ago, I shifted towards something that was more like math plus programming. I like to call it analytics engineering. So a lot of data, a lot of math, a lot of science. And programming all together. And I did that for Call of Duty. So I worked on sort of punishing players that did bad things and rewarding players that did good things in video games. And now at Apple, I work on Siri and Apple Intelligence, and we would like to kind of reward people that use Siri and get good answers, and punish people that use Siri poorly, although of course that never happens. So that's where I'm at. But I've always liked art and generative art, and that's kind of why we're here. Any questions about me or my background or anything? So here's a quick agenda. We'll kind of talk about high level tokens and blockchains, just kind of an introduction to that, and then a little bit of an introduction into generative art and our little exercise, and then kind of roll through some famous NFT collections and kind of learn some of the interesting things that happen when you combine technology and art and you mash it together. So in the beginning, there's this, what is an NFT? What is NFT is short for non-fungible token. So the first thing to understand is fungible, which I, of course, never understood until I got to NFTs. So I brought $1, and I have a volunteer. And my volunteer, we're happy. Would you trade me my dollar for your dollar?
Yeah.
Right. Who cares, right? So when you have money, you're happy to change it. So the best example of something fungible, so we're funging. I don't know, funging is not a word, but we're funging. How about 4 quarters? Would you trade me that dollar for 4 quarters? You may not want to. Like 4 quarters is like heavy.
Yeah.
Like who wants change? But monetarily, it's the same.
Yeah.
You trade back. That's funging. So that's fungible, right? So we demonstrated that with money. So money is a great example. Another great example of fungible are things like frozen concentrated orange juice, for anyone who gets that reference. Like commodities are also known as fungible. If I have a railroad car frozen concentrated orange juice, it's the same as another railroad car frozen concentrated orange juice. So interchangeable, it's countable, it's kind of subdividable down to the smallest unit. The current smallest unit of money is what? Penny. And if you wanted to represent it as data, if you just had a giant integer and you just counted pennies, you're kind of good to go. So on the other side, there's non-fungible. So it's not like money, it's unique. You wouldn't, oddly, dollar has a serial number on it, right? So this dollar is different from this dollar, but that's really just like a security mechanism. It's not important. No one pays more or less money for what serial number dollar you have. It's non-fungible goods aren't really exchangeable, so if I have a Picasso and you have a Rembrandt, like those are just different. Like you can't just swap them. You're not necessarily happy to do that. It is sort of countable as like I have one of this kind or I have zero of this kind, but it's not really. And it's not really subdividable. Like I have a Picasso, I cannot really subdivide that piece of art. It'd be a little bit weird. It's somewhat hilariously, Banksy shredded his piece of art in the auction house. So maybe you could buy one strip of the Banksy, although I don't think they went out and sold that. But I put a little asterisk there. We'll come back to that. And then of course, it's really just a bag of identifiers. You either have this ID of this guy, you either have this Picasso or not. So that's the fungible part, and the non-fungible part. So the next kind of thing we'll talk about is tokens. So in my research, there was a half cent in the United States. The infamous Coinage Act of 1857 discontinued the half cent, but back in the day we had a half cent, so that was the smallest unit. Not anymore. So if you remember anything, you can remember that there was once a half cent in the US. So here's a quick kind of token definition. It's really the fundamental unit and the fundamental useful primitive of what goes on the blockchain. So I kind of define tokens in terms of something else that we need to talk about. It's kind of everything on the blockchain you can kind of think of as a token. So it's like a piece of data, a piece of thing, a piece of art, that's a token. So let's talk a little bit about the blockchain. So this is like the fastest, highest level review of what the blockchain is. So it's this kind of amazing, distributed across many computers, programmable. You can make each thing do different things. It's shared. Everyone can look at it and everyone kind of agrees what's in it. And it's really immutable. Like you put stuff in and it stays in, and then you can put another transaction that subtracts it and another transaction that adds it, but you can't like undo what you had. So it's really this immutable, forever growing ledger. And there's some totally awesome hardcore math that goes into it to provide these cryptographic guarantees, of which, I kind of think of them a little bit separately. There's like data security. So like what numbers you put in are in. There's sort of like entity security. So like you are you on the blockchain. Your account is your account. No one can masquerade as you. You can, of course, lose your account to somebody else by giving them the keys, which you should never do. And then there's this kind of transaction security layer. So when something happens and it goes in, it stays in, and something happens and it comes out, that's how that works. Then there's this kind of programmability side of things, and that's where smart contracts come in. And then amazingly, very importantly, there's fees to do everything on the blockchain. You have to pay money. Imagine how awesome or weird email would be if every email you sent you had to pay money for. I think it'd be amazing because hopefully spam would go to zero and people would send really good emails. All of your marketing emails would be dialed. They wouldn't be crappy. So I kind of, mine is mine, yours is yours. That's my quick summary. So here's some great examples. So Bitcoin is the biggest blockchain, kind of best known. Second best known is maybe Ethereum. So there are huge amounts of money stored in Bitcoin. So people have bought $1 trillion worth of Bitcoin tokens, which is a little bit ridiculous, but maybe it's cool. Kind of most notably for Bitcoin, there's this consensus algorithm that's called proof of work. So everyone that is validating the transactions and making sure that the Bitcoin network is secure, they're doing that by doing a bunch of math. On the Ethereum side, it's the kind of second biggest blockchain. I would maybe say it has like the largest ecosystem wrapped around it, and it has kind of a super awesome programmability layer. There's some programmability on Bitcoin, but Ethereum, there's a ton, and there's these smart contracts and these things called dApps, which are distributed applications, and of course there's NFTs. And they did a ton of work to do this amazing thing where they basically swapped out the engine of the plane in flight and they converted from proof of work to proof of stake consensus algorithm. And now, instead of doing a bunch of computations to prove that to secure the blockchain, you basically pay money. So if you say, hey, this really happened and you're lying, they kind of take your money that you've provided to them to secure that you're not lying. And so in an ideal world, that's a much lower energy cost. So that was kind of one of the major impediments for broader Ethereum adoption, or perceived impediments, and that got swept away about 2.5 years ago. So there's of course a gazillion other blockchains that people may have heard of. Solana, Dogecoin is a somewhat famous one. And then lucky you at CU, there is an intro to blockchain class next semester. You can take it. It's taught by 2 people that work at the Ethereum Foundation and 1 computer science professor, Bo Wagner. So recommend it. So that's kind of the tokens and blockchain, like rapid fire. Any questions about any of that? Anyone want to have any commentary, or we'll dive in? Yeah.
Solana has a proof of history. And how do you distinguish that, or does that matter? Or are these flavors interchangeable? I don't think that.
Yeah, and there's a proof of lots of things that people like to say. I think they're mostly the blockchains compete on their community, how many people are in the community, and the kind of applications and value they provide. So that's sort of like how things get popular. I think Solana is like a well-known Ethereum competitor, and that it has high programmability, and it has a lot of interesting projects. And it's in theory higher throughput right now. But I think the community is just a little bit smaller, and there's definitely less people involved, is kind of how I think about that. But like there can be a lot of math behind the consensus algorithm that they chose, and they made some kind of security decisions about what consensus algorithm they chose or didn't choose. So I think those are things kind of you evaluate if you would like to make a project on a given blockchain or invest in the blockchain's token. Any good question though? Any other questions? Anybody? All right, well, so we'll move on into generative art and our fun little project. So here's a quick definition from Wikipedia: art that has been created with the use of an autonomous system. So my definition is you need like an algorithm plus randomness. That's really all you really need. And typically, especially with computers, the human, you make the algorithm and the computer does the randomness. It'd be very fun to swap that. And so like here's a crazy example. I found this awesome wind chime on Amazon. So this would be this is an example of generative art according to me, right? Wind provides some randomness and jiggles the things, and the human designed the pipes and the pipe lengths and the extra little bells, and that produces, the output of this is music, right? And then over on the left is a super famous early generative artist, Vera Molnar. And that is a plotter picture from the 70s, all those squares drawn on a plotter. And then, there she is with some more modern stuff. I think she passed away late last year, but it's kind of definitely the godfather / godmother of some generative art projects, super early involved. So before we get to our project, I just have to quickly mention. Yeah.
Can I ask, because isn't there one more step, like deciding which we select?
We'll totally talk about that. Okay. So one example, I just wanted to call out that this is not generative art. This is AI generated art. So this is Apple's upcoming Genmoji, where you type in text and you get like a little emoji output, like shrimp with cowboy hat. And then over there, I'm just kind of scrolling through Midjourney, which again, you type in text, you get AI output out. No. So we're gonna, so here's the algorithm that I built, right? And everyone can give a shot. So we have a dice. Here's our randomness right here. And here's my little algorithm, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and a little grid. So everyone has a little piece of paper if you want to test it out. And you can follow my algorithm, or you can make your own. Yeah, and there's a die hiding down at the bottom.
And the cup.
So instead of doing the computer, so I'll just roll 3 rolls and write them down. 5, 6, 6. So I'll just write down my numbers. Another 6. 5. Then I'll follow my
Oh my.
you can just do one. Or you pass it on. So we're all making generative art. Yes. Right. So we built like an algorithm, and we had a source of randomness, our little die, and away we go. There you go.
Just
So,
can I ask a question?
sure.
AI generated art. Art. Is that the inverse, where the humans providing the randomness and Apple or whomever has provided the algorithm?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the randomness is baked in based on the training set, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah, but the generation itself is also based on randomness.
and then of course, like as you walk the
Yeah.
model, there's
Yeah.
some process.
Sure. There's randomness on
A lot of green.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but of course, the
I'm
human
getting a
can.
lot of red.
It'd
I get
be
a lot of
interesting
green
to
too,
see if you
which
could,
is
if you
interesting.
had like
Didn't
a
expect that.
fancy LLM front end that would manipulate the text you put in front, right? Because you put in static text,
I got you.
but yeah, the human is the big driver there.
It's too big drivers.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Did anyone make anything crazy and interesting?
Yeah.
Everyone made their own.
Katie got everything, it's like everything was a square minus one.
Oh,
Wow.
wow, square.
Okay, that's
8
crazy.
squares, nice.
I only get green and red on it. So,
Okay, that's pretty cool.
All right, so
All right.
of course we can make this. We can easily make this in P5, right? So
Yeah.
here's a quick P5 program that does what I just said, where we go to P5 and we get a random number ranging between 0 and 6, and if it's 1, then we make a red circle, and if it's 2, then we make a red rectangle, and so on. Exactly the same algorithm, right? So we get an output like this, and of course we can do this a gazillion times, and we can get lots of outputs. So here's lots of outputs, and you might look at this and you might see some like interesting patterns. maybe like a row that's all the same, or a column that's all the same, or some kind of reflection symmetry. Anyways, I called out this one, right? An interesting all greens. And so with this very simplified algorithm, we have some probabilities of what outputs we could generate, right? So all greens is 1/2 to the 9th. So 1 out of 512, all squares, good job, is also, there's the even numbers are squares in our algorithm. And so that's also, 1 out of 512. So these probabilities are very interesting to remember as we kind of talk about NFTs, as they kind of yield traits and monetary values. So that's like a incredibly compact tutorial on generative art. So we did some generation, and we can kind of see the algorithm does certain things, it doesn't do certain things, and you can kind of see the cool patterns come out the other side. That was not necessarily a particularly artistic pattern, algorithm. It's just triangles and squares and circles, but it's sort of representative. Any generative art questions about any of that stuff? All right, so we'll kind of dive into NFTs. So one good thing to think about is, there's kind of all kinds of NFTs that can represent a lot of different things. So, one good example is like visual art. So like a lot of times, certain things in the traditional art world are you don't really think about, but you totally think about them in like NFT art world. So one of ones, this is one painting by Picasso. He has not painted another painting exactly like this. It's a one of one. And then there's like one of ends. Maybe there's an original that Andy Warhol made, and then he printed it 100 times and signed each print, and it's 1 of 100. I have print 37 of 100 or whatever. In NFT world, there's these things called PFPs, which stands for profile picture, which tends to be a avatar, very human representative, we'll say. They can be all kinds of crazy things, but human representative that, say, you might use as your online identity, like in your social feeds. And then it tends to be the case that kind of pure generative art algorithms are like unique, one of one, but of a series of n, like all that big picture of all that's like a one of whatever it was, 100 and something. Of course, there's all kinds of other art NFTs. There's photography NFTs, music NFTs, video NFTs, music video NFTs. NFTs work really great for like memberships and community and tickets, and like and sometimes the art is folded into that. Like I have this kind of art, and therefore I own one of these arts, and therefore I'm a member of the community, and therefore I get to do all these fun things. It works great for games, especially games where you like own stuff. Digital trading card games are kind of would lend themselves great to NFTs, where the individual cards have rarity, like Magic the Gathering, if people remember that physical card game that had a collectability. There's a really cool use case in Ethereum called ENS, the Ethereum name service, for kind of registering short chunks of text and plugging those chunks of text into the network so that they can represent you or other entities. And then there's this totally awesome use case of fractionalization. So that's actually taking a single thing and chopping it up into lots of little bits. Just like you can take a company and chop it up into little bits of stock. I own a tiny little piece of Apple. Very, very tiny piece of Apple. I'm sure many other people that own index funds also own an incredibly tiny piece of Apple. So that's fractionalization. There's also, right now, there's an amazing website called Polymarket that people use for betting. That's backed by Ethereum. They use it for betting on the outcome of politics right now. So all elections, so you bet on candidate A and they win, then whatever was bet on candidate B gets divided up amongst all the candidate A bettors. So since all politics is exactly 50%, 50%, you have the opportunity to double your money if you guess correctly. So you can't talk about NFTs without talking about money. Money is heavily involved. So this is a CryptoPunk. We'll talk about this more in a second. It's an ape. It's sort of, and he's wearing a hat. He's got a patch. He's got an earring. Someone paid 1.48 million. These numbers will get bigger for this thing. And this happened in September. Yeah, September 5th. So, whatever, six weeks ago. So there still are NFTs and people still pay real money for them. This is the most expensive NFT ever sold. So there's this artist, this is a one of one. There's this artist named Beeple. He makes art every single day. And after day 5,000, he collected some pieces in this giant collage and then sold it. And someone paid $69 million for it. And they did that at Christie's auction in 2021. This is every day is the first 5,000 days. Pretty crazy. Yeah, so Beeple is there's a standard art practice where you make art every day. Beeple is one of those people, and he's been doing it, I think, for like 6,400 days in a row so far. Pretty crazy. Here's a bunch of generative art. This one on the right is actually super famous. There's something hidden in here. Does anyone see what's hidden in here? Once you see it, you can't unsee it. A goose. So this is totally famous. This is a generative art. And it's just supposed to be sort of pulleys and kind of cables. And it just turned out with this color palette, it absolutely looks like a goose. And it became super famous because of that, right? So there's a goose. People actually filmed, sorry, not people. Dmitry Cherniak is the artist. He filmed a video with him holding a goose. What the heck? So this is the chromey squiggle that kind of is super famous generative art. That's an archetype, that kind of crazy looking cube. That black and white one is a Fidenza, and this one here is called an autoglyph. And these all have giant price points on them. And this is from a 2023 Sotheby's auction, sort of famous. There's a crypto company that went belly up called 3 Arrows Capital, and they ended up selling off all their art. And they sold this famous goose ringer, which is by far like whatever 10x the next ringer. So there's some more sales. Here's some more one of ones. These are X copy. This is an art style called glitch art, which is kind of jiggly. So these are all like GIFs. So this is right click and save, sold for 7 million, and then this one more recently sold for 330K. So here's what a blockchain person calls trad art. Trad art, right? Like art. Everyone else calls it art, like actual art, and then they call NFTs fake art, but NFT people call this trad art. So this is Monet water lilies painting, and over there is Pete Mondrian. And super. This is, one might look at this and say, is that really art? It's actually super famous, kind of precursor to kind of modern art and cubism and a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, so same kind of ginormous numbers, right? So it's not just numbers wise. Yeah, they're kind of there. They're kind of there. So CryptoPunks. So I'm gonna walk through some super famous NFT collections, and we'll kind of talk about, kind of one interesting topic per collection. So here's CryptoPunks. They're these 24 by 24 pixel arts. This is kind of like the first NFT, so it has a lot of provenance of being the first, and that's one of the reasons why the price point is just ridiculous. Sort of modeled after like London, the Clash punk movement, the Ramones. So one, like we showed with the art that we did, there's a lot of probabilities, and they end up being represented in NFTs as what's called traits. So they have all these attributes of, this is a male, he's got a luxurious beard, he's got classic shades, he's got crazy hair. And it tells you like how many other of 10,000 have this. So this is a PFP project, It looks like a person, right? And there's 10,000 of these. Here's a woman with clown eyes green, smoking a cigarette. So a good mechanism to evaluate NFT collections is top sales. So we've talked about that. So CryptoPunks have 6 of the top 10 NFT sales ever, and they're all these like light blue guys. So those like light blue guys are not male, not female. They're aliens. And then the next row, which represents also super rare, are apes. So there's 9 aliens out of 10,000, and there's 24 apes out of 10,000, and then the bottom one are zombies, right? So there's still like active, like, in this year, this guy got resold this year for 4,500 ETH, so $16.03 million. Blip. So yeah, so there are very high numbers attached to some of the most influential NFTs. Another kind of big NFT collection, the second most popular, this one really kind of pierced to like the celebrity sphere, and celebrities have Bored Apes. Again, another PFP project, 10,000 of these. And you can kind of see how you might generate them with a bunch of layers. You might have a base layer and then something that lays on top, and then you kind of just stack it up. And then you may have some kind of rules that, oh no, you can't have bunny ears and hats at the same time, or I don't know what. So, so this is, sort of the Bored Ape Yacht Club main website. And another way to evaluate NFTs is the price floor. So of all the NFTs, what in this particular collection, what is the lowest priced one that there is? And there's sort of like NFT trading things you can do called sweeping the floor, where you buy all the lowest priced ones. Anyways, back in May 2022, the price floor was all the way up at 128 ETH. It is currently 12. So if the previous slides made you think, wow, there's a lot of money to be made, this is a good old 10x loss. That's really hard to do in the stock market. Basically impossible. Like there's no way an index fund is to go down to 1/10 of its price, even in the worst situations. At least not in the US. That's a little bit surprising. So, so there's all these websites that have pricing information. This is nftpricefloor.com. Here's another kind of maybe the third most famous PFP is sort of modeled after anime. Again, a bunch of kind of characters, and you can kind of see in your head how these layers might fit together. Kind of capturing anime, holding a giant sword like one does. So this is what's called a D app. So this is Azuki, and this is the Azuki D app. So this is a website. And in theory, this website could talk directly to the Ethereum network and say, what Azuki NFTs are available for sale, what are their prices, but it usually talks to an API that then talks to the Ethereum network. And so this is kind of built by the Azuki team. So when you launch an NFT, you usually launch a website with it, especially when you want to make money. You launch a website with it, and it has all kinds of filtering and all kinds of, has a huge trait collection. And so, the idea is sort of to give the collector or the purchaser a lot of personalization. If you have white hair, maybe you want also someone with white or blue hair. So you can kind of find an accurate avatar to represent you. The next thing of which there are a gazillion of are called marketplaces. So you the NFT maker, you have your own website, but there's also a gazillion marketplaces that also list NFTs and kind of have them for sale. And this is much more about sort of collecting and selling. So the price tends to be much more prominently featured here, not really any price. On Marketplace, there's price. So this is OpenSea. Again, you might have sorting. This one is another marketplace called Looks Rare. A lot of these. Here's one called Rareable. They're kind of complicated websites all built to enable you to come in and buy, and the marketplace takes a small fee, and you get the NFT. Here's one called Magic Eden. Here's one called Blur. So this one is substantially more trader centric. Maybe some of the other ones are more collector centric. Like I want, this set of traits and I'm interested in this. This is more like I'm going to buy and I'm going to wait for it to go up and I'm going to sell and I'm going to use these online tools to help me determine that. E-Trade, Robinhood have been around for a long time. I'm not sure however good their tools are, they help you figure out when it's going to go up or when it's going to go down. They try hard though. Kind of lists a lot of stats about the collection. And this is again like a little floor price graph. So the Azuki floor is in the 5 ETH. So 1 ETH is $2,600. So if you want one of these, it's whatever, 15K or 14K or something like that. So let's talk about the Chromie Squiggle. So this is more like away from the PFP world and into more of the generative art world. So this project is super cool in that it was like project number 1. And again, there's all these different types. The fuzzy one is really cool. You can absolutely in your head much easier envision building this in P5. And if you Google for P5 Chromie Squiggle, there's like 30 projects that you can look at where someone built something like one of these. So this, it tends to be the case when you get into more of the generative art side of the world, you can kind of see the algorithm in your head a little bit better. So there's a bunch of, clearly they're just drawing circles. Sometimes they have a stroke around that circle. Sometimes they make the circle bigger. Sometimes they drive through the hypers, they drive through the color palette, the hue, they spin the hue circle multiple times. And whereas the kind of standards, they're just kind of taking one revolution through. So this spawn, so Snowfro, Eric Calderon, who built Chromie Squiggle, built a website that went with it, but it wasn't just a regular like PFP kind of website. It wasn't just a regular DApp. It was actually like an art market, and it had collections, and you could submit collections. And it had a board that did curation. It put forward some of the kind of most famous generative art projects. And the way that it works is you basically build your algorithm. And a lot of times what's called short form generative art, you build your algorithm, you run it a bunch of times, you get a bunch of outputs, and then you can cherry pick through those outputs. Like I like these outputs. So what got innovated here with the NFTs is the algorithm got baked onto the chain before any were generated. And then buyers would come up, they would buy or bid or pre-bet, and then they would get what they get. Like, too bad for you if you get a cool one or a rare one or not a rare one. And so it actually puts more pressure on the artist. And I've got a good quote from Eric. It really forces the artist to accept every single output. And so you got to work really hard on the algorithm. And that kind of coined this new thing called long form generative art. So that's super cool. That's kind of a great outcome of generative art, fused with the blockchain, that it kind of made this new art form. So it kind of turns out that some of these early pieces, of which we've seen a couple, and we'll see a few more, so the goose is one good example. They spend a lot of time building that algorithm and making sure that all the outputs are good, and the outputs have a certain distribution, and that kind of, however spread out they were, that sort of capped the collection size. So, one of the most famous, and I think the number one selling output from art blocks is this generative art collection called Fidenza. And it's all this kind of swirly stuff. So where does that come from? So that comes from a set of algorithms called flow fields. So basically you make a grid of points, and then on each grid you kind of roll a die, and that die roll gives you a vector. And this flow field is built, using Perlin noise. So, grid point and the one and the grid point right next to it, they're not like totally pointing different. There's kind of a smoothness to here. You can obviously, make it less smooth or more smooth, but then once you have this vector field, you can kind of draw through that vector field and be influenced by it. And this kind of these flowy algorithms are really popular in generative art in general. And they kind of give rise to, kind of art that feels very organic. And I think a lot of times on the computer, you're trying to get from, grids and squares to something way more like the real world. And so sometimes the modern art, I feel like they often go the other way. They have, some modern art can be very, very blocky, or at least there's a period where a lot of modern art was very blocky and very unnatural. So this is the last project we'll talk about, and it's one of my absolute favorites, and it has just an incredible flavor of ridiculousness to it. So this is a project called Loot, and this is the art. And what the heck? This doesn't look like art. It looks like a bunch of text, and it really is. That's exactly what it is. So it's basically like D&D equipment. So it's totally cool. So it's really open, and it has built on top of this is this most amazing community. So there's like 7,777 of these that are basically like D&D characters, and that's it. And it was a very constrained primitive, but it was a nice, beautiful foundation on top of which a ton of stuff got built. So here's like the Loot D app. So you can get loot and you can gear up, and it kind of all talks about characters and quests and lore, and it has all this like, kind of like D&D, just giant fan out of cool stuff. There's this thing called the Loot Foundation. So that's super awesome. So part of loot and part of the sale and part of the fee that goes into when a loot item changes hands goes to the foundation, and the foundation uses that to help expand the universe. It might give grants, might do other stuff, might build stuff themselves, might fund people to work on the website or pay for web hosting, or who knows what. So that's a crazy cool output of blockchain, where you can kind of get some money and you can use that to make things live on. So that's the Loot Foundation. Then there's like Loot Punk. This is just a tiny like snapshot. So there's these pixelated characters, kind of CryptoPunk mashed with D&D. So every loot character has like a kind of procedural generated character that goes with it. So that's super, super fascinating. So if you have a sword, then your character has a sword. If you have, Black Armor of Doom, then your character has Black Armor of Doom. Then there's this project that's just about the rings. So they just made these crazy 3D ring renders, again, that are kind of meshed to the outputs. So if you have a loot pass, you can go to Rings for Loot, this project, and you can say, hey, I have a loot card, and I have a gold ring +1. And then you would get like a ring NFT of your gold ring +1, for some fee. So it's kind of this kind of layered community, totally fascinating. So let's sort of like look behind the covers really quickly. So NFTs on Ethereum are built on this standard called ERC 721. This was basically defined and extracted from CryptoPunks. CryptoPunks was really the first smart contract, first big smart contract. And they basically built this standard out of that. And so it has things that you might think are important, like, who owns this, transfer this from A to B, like who can transfer this, and then sort of this kind of key, super awesome, important method that you can call on the blockchain that is give me the token URI. So we're going to dive into exactly what that is. So you can go to this website called the NFT Checker, and it tells you can go to like one of the marketplaces. You can copy the contract ID, and you can copy the like token ID, and you can paste them in. And if we do that, there's the loot contract ID, and then this is token 882, and it's got like a Mace of Rage and a Demon Husk armor and a divine hood and a hard leather belt and leather boots and gloves and a dusk glow titanium ring of rage. Who doesn't want one of those? It's awesome. So when you call this method, you get back this image, right? So if you were to call this for a CryptoPunk, I would get back a CryptoPunk. If I were to call this for a Fidenza, I would get back a Fidenza. And you get some cool metadata. So let's go looking, right? So you get this image. If we when we get back this metadata, that's what's kind of getting rendered here. So let's kind of see how that works. So we call this token URI function, and we pass in 882, and we do it against this particular contract. We get back this barf. So at the top is important. This is like an encoded JSON file, right? So we can decode this. And so we get like what we saw on that page previously. So we get the name of this particular NFT, which is bag number 882, not particularly impressive. And we get a description, and then we get an encoded barf, and this time it happens to be an SVG. So we can decode that, and we get an SVG image like that everyone that hopefully that does creative coding can kind of recognize. And it has all those chunks of text, but if it was a Fidenza, it might have paths and colors and the swirly parts. But in this particular case, it's just loot. And we can render this back to an image, and then of course we get back this image where we just started. So we can do this loop one more time, and we can kind of try to dig into the code. So like on the web, we can kind of follow web page, but whenever we want to know kind of what's going on, we can click on where it says like view source or inspect. We can get some more details. So we can kind of do that too. So we can, much like the web, the entire blockchain is totally shareable, right? So it's all online, and everyone can go looking. So kind of the base way to do that, there's a lot of nicer ways, but the base way to do that is through this website called Etherscan. Again, we like plug in that contract ID, and then down at the bottom, there's the code, like the code. And we can go looking at the code, a bigger version. And here is the code that builds that SVG. This is, Ethereum Solidity code. To me, it looks a lot like TypeScript or a little bit like JavaScript. And you can kind of see it's building up this giant string that is representing the SVG, one piece at a time, first with the weapon, and then with the armor, and then so on and so forth. And then at the bottom, with the ring. And then they're doing some encoding to give that giant encoded barf that we just saw. So we can kind of dig in of like, what happens? Like, how's this working? Like what exactly is happening? So maybe let's kind of dig into the get ring. So inside the get ring, there's basically a die that's getting rolled based on the token that you come in with. And depending on what the roll is, it is plucking out the different pieces of the string and is building them up one piece at a time, titanium ring of rage. And then it's taking a name prefix and a name suffix. So dusk glow, and it's, putting that in the front. And then you kind of, curses. Then we get back to the kind of imagery we've shown, we've got the dusk glow titanium ring of rage. That's how all those pieces fit together. And you can go forth and build some NFTs. And that's the end. So I've actually pitched teaching a class on exactly this to the people that sit over there in that room. So anyone that wanted to go over there and kick Mark in the shin, or Shiva, or Danny, you have my permission. And if anyone has some advice about what the class should have in it, or some feedback, or oh, you should do generative art, like this kind of stuff, or if you don't do 3D, it's worthless, or whatever you'd like to tell me, that would be absolutely amazing. You can send me an email. You can talk to me afterwards. I'd love to get some feedback on, how to make this a class and how to teach it here. Yeah.
Atlas has an undergraduate generative AI class, and it may be worth it to talk to Larissa, the instructor.
Right on.
She works in our lab.
Okay.
Another question. So what is PFP and then the later one you talk about?
What's the difference?
Yeah.
Technically how it's implemented, not that much. It just tends to be the case that these PFP collections are large, so close to 10,000, whatever, into the thousands. And then they tend to be very avatar-ish. So some representation that looks human-ish, there's some that are like frogs, and there's some that are cats, but there's a gazillion other projects that are more blocky or more real. Like Azuki and Bored Ape are very kind of smooth art style. CryptoPunks is very pixelated. There's other ones that are, even worse art. Pepe the Frog is like kind of popular in NFTs because people like memes, and memes go with NFTs really well. I don't know. And then the more like art blocks, generative art collections are much more, at least in my mind, around the art, and they tend to get collected by people that like art, and often that's what gets auctioned at auctions, is more like the art side of the universe. And then that loot project at the end is a kind of a weird in the middle. It's not really art. It's much more about like the community and what can be built on top of it. Yeah. Did that help answer?
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thanks everybody. What else? Yeah.
I've got some questions. So first of all, what does it mean you own it? It's just you appear in a certain blockchain.
Yeah, exactly. So you have a just like you have $10 in your bank account. You have an account. It has some things attached to it, and in this particular case, you have a bag of token IDs that go with you.
Yeah, but the thing is that with art is something like, in theory, let's say that's a company owns a famous painting, it can put it in the entrance and being like, we are rich, we bought this painting, and you can see it.
Right, there's physical
And
security.
no one else can see it. Yeah, in different place you cannot see it. But
Yeah.
this is not the case here, of course, because everyone can copy it very easily.
Correct.
Okay, so this is like really owned by an idea that owning itself means something. Yeah. So
I mean, it also kind of so at some level, yeah, this is all fake. But at another level, people pay real money for it, and like things that matter in the art world, like I'm not an art collector. Hopefully I don't look like an art collector. Like things like provenance, like, oh, this painting hung here in whatever, and then it hung here, and now it hangs here. Like that's like insanely important. Like they care a lot about that.
Mhm.
And so when those people, like there's like the MoMA, like the curator from MoMA or LACMA or whatever, these huge modern art places in the United States or in the world, when they show up, they bring those sensibilities with them, and they know, aha, this was like really early, and it was generated by this person, and then it was owned by these people, and it went on sale here, and then it got bought. Like, if the goose sells again, all that provenance will absolutely add to its value. So things that like, and the provenance on the blockchain is like perfect. Like, and it, I don't know, I guess everyone loves like a mystery. And they make like, movies out of those, but like, they also sort of appreciate like appropriate provenance. Like, if you roll up with your saved CryptoPunk that you have when you're all, great, good for you. People do interesting things with NFTs. Like, if you have an NFT, sometimes they'll have like a physical pairing with it. Like, I own A, and I'll get like a signed print from the artist of that. So that there is an interesting tie between the blockchain world and the physical world.
Yeah, and sorry, that's one question.
Sure.
No, but I didn't want to interrupt your question and answer.
Okay, the question is there a limit for the algorithm length or something like that? Because it's like very natural to involve fractals, and then you could have very realistic images that looks but then obviously the starts to be
You
question if it's really what they are.
You pay for your data on the blockchain, right? So it's sort of this giant world shared computer, and there's fees.
Okay.
So when you publish your algorithm, it costs you money. And if you publish a ginormous algorithm, it could cost you a lot of money. The entirety of the Ethereum blockchain is like under 10 gigs right now, I think. So like one video file is way more than that. So of course there's off-chain, like there's off-chain options as well. We maybe just have the metadata on the chain, but the actual asset is elsewhere. Yeah.
I was going to say, I really appreciate your talk.
Thank you.
And it's fascinating. I think the idea that it would be a course would be crazy good. The thing that's so remarkable to me about the whole domain, but your presentation in particular is illustrates this or just manifests it. It's a real paradox. You're taking something that's completely random and you're computing it, and then you can present it in this extremely organized way. So it's like, how can that even be, right? So it's basically things happen because they can. And so we're at this point in the computer technology where you can do this stuff and you just let it out into the wild, and this is what's happening.
Yeah.
So it almost has like a lifelike character to it, which I think is just interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of people that work really, really hard on it, on sort of like the infrastructure, and then there's it just is super fertile foundation for creative people to pile on top.
Where do you see this going? Because obviously this is a moving picture, right?
I was just asking like to some people, like, do you think it's all gonna go away? It feels like there's some, like this, this kind of rock solid foundation of internet ownership it doesn't seem like that concept is ever going to go away. This may not be the final form, but like this digital, like everyone has had a bank account where like you do a withdrawal and you get 2 withdrawals. Like, what the heck is that? Or you do deposit and it just doubles your deposit. It's like, like transaction security in banks is disappointing to say the least sometimes. But like with this thing that's like, it's just rock solid. Like, for whatever reason, like I said, the political betting has totally taken off with cryptocurrency, because you can kind of see there's no, like, for events that have obvious source of truth, like, I don't know, maybe the US election isn't the most obvious source of truth, but eventually there'll be someone that holds the different offices. Like, it just is really, it works really well. Like, it has turned out that the cryptocurrency has worked really well. And so people like a little bit of the anonymity and the fluidity of the transactions and how you can get in and out, and it just sort of like the kind of like a kind of wild west vibe some people really appreciate. where it's not nearly as regulated, like, I don't know, it seems like E-Trade could be selling bets on presidents, but they're not, or they're afraid, or they can't, I don't know. You know, they're just taking fees, just like printing money. There's like been millions and millions of dollars wagered on who's gonna win political elections. Like I'd love to get 1% of that. You know, like who wouldn't, right? It seems like great business. Yeah.
I'm curious how reproducing the art in real world products, let's say someone loves the goose and they want to make a bunch of goose backpacks or something with that
Yeah.
image screen printed on, would they be, how does that work? Are they getting the artist's
Yeah.
approval or the owner's approval?
All of the above. Some collections are somewhat famously like CC0 licensed. And they let you print whatever you want, like good for you. Like, and then other things you know, the sort of there's rights granted with ownership. If you owned the goose, then maybe depending on how that worked, you would have rights to reproduce it and make money off of that. So it becomes I don't know, lawyers get involved, but like you can have like, it is a little bit like internet culture, open source vibe. So you can look at the code and you can, I think a lot of projects are like, have very open licenses to enable you to bring it to the physical world however you see fit. Even if you don't own it, like you could go make goose backpacks. I don't know. I mean, it's for certainly for some projects that are CC0, it's green light because they just believe that all, you know, rising tide floats all boats. So like the more it's out there, the more it's in the community, you know, good for everybody. So it's like a, you know, it's just a very experimental art platform world. It's super fascinating.
Can I ask you another question?
Sure.
So this is sort of an artistic use case, if you will, that you're demonstrating. But this whole thing about, you know, manifesting computing, controlling randomness. Are there other use cases, for instance, like the creation of synthetic data for AI training? Things like that. I just wonder about the other use cases of this sort of blend. Kind of thinking about it this way, not for the first time, but particularly your presentation was so organized.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is absolutely possible that the model training data is incredibly valuable. Like right now, it's a little constrained with compute resources to leverage an unbounded set of training data, but over time that'll get better. And then the thing that actually has value is all the data, right? You know, so you know, the companies, you know, you are the product, as I like to say. And I think there is absolutely a world where as you interact with the world, you could be earning money by recording that interaction, whatever that may be, and selling that to a data provider, or you're on a platform where your interactions are, you know, like, you know, you're basically doing revenue sharing with Facebook. That'd be awesome. They would be very loath to do that until a competitor grew up to beat them. You know, so the market's very entrenched, but there is absolutely a world where the data ultimately has value, and the companies would like to come individual to individual. And it'd be amazing to ride that program on blockchain rails, you know, because, you know, microtransactions and across borders, and, you know, like it'd just be so easy to do that with this kind of technology. Well, we're already a little bit over time, so thanks everybody.